Welcome everyone to this session. We would like to welcome Mark Allen to present the session on the different software that's available for questioning. Mark, over to you.
Okay, thanks. Hi all. Let me just get so you can actually see me to start with. There we are. Yeah, just as a start is to say hi all. For those of you who haven't met me directly as yet, and I think pretty much everyone has, I'm the IT manager for the faculty. I have a particular interest in assessments and how IT can help assessments. And I think what's happened is, as I was looking at doing a chat for today, my concepts changed. So while I started off purely looking at platforms for IT, what I think it's going to turn into is the place of IT in assessments. And especially when looking at previous topics, there's a lot of discussion that can be made about, is there a place for IT? Is it the right way to do things, especially in the medical arena? And how do various methods of assessment leverage off IT? What I'm going to start doing is, because you've seen enough of my face, is mostly talk off pictures and show you websites and various other things. So goodbye to my face for the moment, and I'm going to start just sharing the screen as we go. So what we've got to start with, purely it's the way in which where you're looking at the place of assessments in the place of teaching. So to start with, what we do is, ideally what you do is you build assessment objectives for a course. Once you know what you're going to teach, you actually start doing the teaching. You use assessments firstly to find out whether the students understand what you're teaching, but also as a method of finding out whether you've actually taught the right things. And then you use the assessments to go back and look to see whether you've covered all the objectives that you thought you had covered. Assessments mostly fitting into either summative assessments versus formative assessments. And I mean, there's a lot of discussion, which I'm sure you've had already, which you're most likely going to have again in the future, as to the place of assessments and whether they're actually necessary. In most circumstances, summative assessments are there so that it gives people a nice security blanket feeling that there's a single point at which you can decide whether people pass or fail. It also gives regulatory bodies the comfortable feeling that there actually has been a testing stage, and at some point what they've done is they've got the right candidates for the right jobs at the time. The hidden part of assessments, which a lot of people don't look at, but fortunately what does work in WITS to a large degree, is the assessment of assessments themselves. And I know there've been talks about this before, and possibly there will be more going on, and I'm most likely going to be repeating things at the moment. But what you look at when you're looking at the assessments is to say, are we delivering a fair assessment? Can we use this assessment again in the future? And exactly are we assessing using this? So what we're looking at is, was it a fair assessment? Is the psychometrics of the assessment? And I'm sure the topics of the Easiness Index and Discrimination Indexes have been looked into. Easiness Index purely says what percentage of the class got the questions correct or incorrect. And the Discrimination Index tells you, was the question based at the right level to try and split the people who you think you should be passing from the people who you think you should be failing. And we can always go into a discussion of that later. Ideally, what systems need to tell you as well is, what is the performance of individual questions over time? To say that if you have got yourself a reasonable question, are your classes performing in the same way? So that in a repeated fashion, you can make sure that you're assessing the same things and that the level of your assessment is set correctly. There's also looking at the question logic itself. What are you assessing? Are you assessing what you thought your objectives were? And what levels of assessment are you looking at? And I saw there was a whole lecture by Shera on this previously. Also, you need to have a close look at your distractors to make sure if you've actually constructed your question well. And this is mostly looking at things like the multiple choice questions. And I'll go into the various types of questions later on in the day. And then looking at the object of question tagging, which is that if you are starting to build up large sets of questions, how do you find them again? And how do you share them with other people and build them into groups so you can look at question banks? And especially if you're ever moving questions from the summative to the formative arena, allowing students to set up their own sets of questions. And purely for the academic side is the history and origin and changes of questions. What's really nice to see is how questions change over time, how they are corrected, ideally who created them, what was the level of the person who created them, so you can assess who makes the best questions and whether there's any way in which to get people to improve questions. So part of what we're looking at for examination systems, and when we're talking about examination systems, the ones that exist at WITS currently, and I'm sure there are others around at the moment as well, the one which this faculty uses quite a lot is question mark, the current version being question mark on demand. Ulwazi, which is the WITS version of Canvas. We're not meant to use the word Canvas, but nonetheless, if you're searching on the internet, that's what you'll find, is used to deliver questions, as is Moodle. Sakai is still there because part of the discussion is what do you do with the questions that you've put into various other systems? Saw a very nice lecture on .doctor itself, and we're starting to look at an assessment system called Rogo for question banking. So these are systems that are used to deliver the questions electronically. However, you can get, if we look at the various other methods of assessment, you get the old-fashioned paper-based assessments, and IT comes into that role when you're looking at assessing the assessments itself, and possibly in the banking arena. And we're talking question banking arena, of course. Completely electronically delivered assessments, and then mixed assessments, and some of which I was hoping to show a demonstration at the moment of the virtual microscope or a ventilator, but something else which I'll hopefully be able to bring up just for a few minutes, which might work as a very nice method of assessments. I'm purely trying to log into the system at the moment. And I'll bring it across shortly. Right. Just to show you, and I think it can be seen at the moment, is what could be used in an assessment is something like a patient who has ARDS, and what you're wanting to do is actually start setting up a mechanical ventilator, and it allows you to do fairly high-level simulations on an individual basis during an exam situation, both for formative and for summative effects. And you can work a ventilator as though you've got a simulated patient. And this could form part of a question and give people a very realistic input or output as they are doing the exam itself. The other thing which is used quite a lot at the faculty is the virtual microscope. And although that hasn't been fully integrated into assessments at the moment, there is a move to do that currently. So the first part of it is the actual delivery of the assessment itself. And the reality of is if you look at something like .doctor, where the examination itself is done on a clinical basis, but it's tracked by a digital method. Part of the things that you're looking at exams is the reproducibility of your exams. With clinical exams, it's very difficult to get the same patients unless they're simulated, but nonetheless, you can track the performance over time. So what I think I'm going to do is to just look at various electronic methods to start with. I'll go back and look at other examples later. At this point, with the rambling on, are there any questions while I move things across? Right, just to bring in another page here. For those of you who have seen question mark on demand, it's used particularly within the BCMP arena. It's used within the MBBCH degree, and it's used within the NMFC course that's running at the moment. It's a system which is fairly well integrated. It allows banking to a certain degree. It allows the assessment delivery itself and allows fairly detailed reports of those assessments. And the big thing is the item analysis which can be delivered. I'm sure that most of you have seen the assessments that are delivered. The majority of assessments that are delivered are purely multiple choice questions. There has been some further and wider use of the assessment platform within the BCMP course. And I might go and show you some of those things later. But what we're looking at is the item analysis kind of reports that you can get, which tells you how individual questions perform. The problem with most of these systems is the ability to look at the performance of questions over time and to look at particular exams. So you can compare, for example, the first round of exams versus the last round of exams and see whether the experience that students have had over the course of a year changes things. So if you deliver in a block release format in the way that medicine delivers, can you actually see a difference in the performance of an exam, and do you want to actually modify that to make sure that you are giving similar grades to students as the experience goes up? I'll just see if I can find an exam as an example at the moment. Right. So this is what I wanted to show you, was various reports that you can view the same assessment over time and see how things have changed. However, let's just see, you can actually have a look and see how individual participants have performed in a course. So if we look at various exams, and I think possibly with the cohort that might be seeing the NMFC course at the moment, we can have a look at a particular assessment, so it's not individual students. And if any student details do come up, what I'll do is I'll just close it quickly. And I think rather than wait for the reports to come up at the moment, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move on to the next topic. We can always come back and have a look at reports. It doesn't really change things that much. So there are various ways of delivering assessments. And what you'll always see with various programs, everyone will tell you that their method of delivery is the best format out there. In the reality, with most systems, the delivery of the questions is not the most difficult thing. What is important is the ongoing analysis, question banking, and the ability to import and export questions. And one of the things that I'm going to be talking at the moment is QTI. So there are a number of standards that can be used and are used in the faculty at the moment. So if we go back here, there's a standard from IMS Global, which is an international consortium of academic institutions and academic service providers, the guys who write the software. So the QTI standard is an interoperability standard that allows you to export questions from one system into another. Unfortunately, most of the systems tend to develop their own standards. So Question Mark, for example, has got the QPAC format. Moodle has an XML format for importing and exporting. even though they can import Q packs as well. Rogo has its own pack. And that's why, and I'll show you later, I'm a firm format of comma-separated values and Excel, which leaves you to a standard format. The one of interest, which we were discussing earlier today, is a format called XLIFF, which is a format used for translating questions, so that you could possibly deliver questions in people's mother tongues, and students can actually decide at the point of examinations which language they're going to use for the assessments. This is used quite successfully or quite frequently at the moment by the Afrikaans universities, but is not broadly done, especially in the medical field, because of the fact that most textbooks are based in English. You get like that at the moment. The last thing is to also show you about Rogo and the abilities that it does have at the moment. What Rogo allows you to do as well is to, although they call things by the wrong fashion, they talk about Bloom's taxonomy, but it's actually looking into the cognitive level of the questions that are being put into the paper. What they do is, let me just see if I can get a list of questions as an example. So what this system allows you to do, and what we might be looking at is looking at various methods of looking at innovative questions at the moment. And as an example, which is not a true case, so don't call me out on this. This is not a TB case. What you've got is a scenario where you could have a focus in a lung or a lesion in a lung, asking a student to highlight the area of concern or highlight an area of consolidation in a chest. You could mark them on the completeness and the accuracy with which they find the lump or the mass. So what this does is assigns a percentage depending on how closely to the identified mark of the examiner the lesion has been identified. Most of these, as you can see, consists of some kind of a theme, a note to an examiner, a scenario for the student, and then maybe a leading question, which can change over the course of an examination. If you look at other methods or other types of questions that can be done, there are calculation questions. These ones are quite exciting. They allow you to put in a formula. So say, for example, an easy one, you're looking at body mass index. So you're looking at abdominal circumference, you're looking at height, and you're looking at weight. You can auto-generate questions on the system so that every student has a different answer, although the understanding would have to be the same in order to complete the questions. And you can, the various sorts of questions that carry on, extended matching questions, the fill in the blank. There's also methods of marking essay type questions online so that they can be reviewed later. Ranking in order of importance. And also the script concordance test, which they're talking about, it supposedly works well. I haven't seen it being run that effectively at the moment, but it allows you to write a rubric where students, and it'll see how similar the meaning of the script is. It's in an experimental phase at the moment, but it might lead to a way of marking essay type questions. However, it does assume that you have a fairly good English language skills, which we might be lacking at the moment. If we run through to various systems at the moment, just showing you the same thing that can appear in Uwazi at the moment. Also, you can put in mathematical questions. You can add formulas in very pretty ways and link into external material in order to complete your questions. And this is the place where you might be able to do something like use the virtual microscope as part of an exam. The next thing on with that is, for example, just a report that you would see in Moodle. I'm running it quickly because it actually has students' names in it. But there are a number of ways in which you can grade reports online in Moodle. One of the nice things that Moodle allows you to do is to deliver the questions to a cell phone or otherwise portable device. Open the exam at a specific time, allow the student a limited time to write the exam. It then gets encrypted on the remote device and can get uploaded later. Within resource constrained environments such as WITS, this allows students to do exams electronically with a fair amount of control, but allows them to continue the exams, especially in the case of power failures or data transfer failures. Having gone through things fairly quickly at the moment, I'm just going to close this and go back to talking and hopefully have a discussion at the moment. So one of the things that I was going to ask is, can you think of any format of questions which you're using at the moment, which you would think of would have major difficulty in being transformed to electronic format? And we can maybe have a discussion about how those can be utilized and transformed electronically. The other thing to discuss is the importance of distractors and how good the distractors are. And the very last discussion is whether or not to actually add in the explanation if you are going to turn examination questions into formative questions, and whether or not to actually include feedback even on questions which are not going to be used for formative usage, but to be used as an important learning opportunity. One of the things to report back as well, I'm going to have to just, I wasn't sharing that at the moment, but let me quickly share that screen again. And if we look at that, what we're doing is we're giving the ability to add the feedback and add that into the question banking process, so that examiners in the past can look at your, examiners in the future can look at your thinking when they are looking at your questions and maybe modify distractors, even though the question itself might not change. I think ideally, is there, let me just see if I can see hands up at the moment. Can't see any hands up at the moment. I don't know if anybody has a question which they think that is only could be clinically based at the moment, but they might be able to use electronically, but haven't thought out a method at the moment.
Mark, there are a couple of comments in the chat which you, excuse me, potentially could reflect upon if you like before questions. Thank you. Yeah.
Right. So we got the Lazelle's one, the analysis of question marks. Yeah, the question mark analysis is a little bit more. It's a little bit more organized than the Ulwazi question analytics. And the big thing with question mark is it allows you to look at the performance of those exams. Because it runs a bank in the back end, it allows you to analyze the performance of questions over multiple exams. And that's really the test of your question itself, rather than the test of the exam. So you can look at exams themselves versus individual questions when you're looking at things. And question mark gives you, as I said, much more details. And yeah, Nabila agrees with that. The other thing as well is that, yeah, script concordance tests are used internationally. Yeah. So it's testing reasoning. Yeah. And do we have the technology to develop adaptive questioning for students? What we can actually do is question mark itself has the ability to do that, as does Rogo. It's a good point to bring up. One of the points that was brought up recently in a big discussion between all of the medical schools is Maastricht University is now starting to, what they do firstly is they run the same exam across all years of medicine. What the difference is that in first year, you're expected to achieve a minimum mark of about 20%, whereas by final year, you're expected to achieve a minimum mark of about 70%. What it does do is it gives you the idea of where you are progressing to and what you need to learn. And a lot of the assessments are done at the time at which the students feel comfortable. So they can perseverate within a certain subcourse, and they can do the assessment when they feel comfortable to benchmark themselves, knowing that they have to complete them over a number of years. When looking at the simplest formats for assessment again, and let me maybe just show that again, is that if we're looking at a simple assessment, and here what's happened is the actual names are blanked out, but this is purely using Excel to do an assessment of the exam itself. So this can be taken from paper, can be done from sort of the standard paper-based exams, can come in comma-separated values from other exam systems, which is generally the easiest way of exporting data. This particular exam, what's nice about it is it's been tagged very well. So if you have a look at this question, for example, it tells you a lot about the question itself, and that's the big advantage about tagging itself. So what they're looking at is they're looking to see how difficult this question is, what areas of competence they're looking at, etc. And you can go back and analyze that later. So what you can do, for example, what's nice on this particular exam, is you can actually have a look and see that as questions get more difficult, so the normal curves stay in place. But the students do worse and worse, which is the way that you would expect things. So the easy questions are easy to do. Everybody performs well. The questions that are assessed by the examiners as more difficult questions do more poorly. And then what you're looking at is from Sherry's talk again, is that knowledge questions, people do a lot better. So you can actually see where the peak of the normal curve moves, depending on whether you're actually going to apply your knowledge and how they do with problem solving. And then it's the same thing again, to see, unfortunately, for some of these graphs, what happens is there's not enough questions to do a full assessment. But you can see for this particular group of students that they tend to move, there's a right shift for public health because the importance that is placed on public health at the moment, whereas the critical analysis and research is a fairly broad-based curve. It's this green curve over here. So people do either extremely well if they go into the research arena or extremely badly if they are going into the clinical area. And it allows you purely to see whether you're covering the areas well enough or not. You can do all sorts of great analysis as well, for example, like heat maps. So you can see where particular areas, this is comparing universities, and will tell you where certain universities are strong and where they're weak, and where your course is possibly lacking, either that you're not examining correctly or you're not teaching correctly. And as I said, this is purely based on a simple Excel basis, also giving you the ability to assess your questions almost on the fly. So you can have a look at, I'm just trying to see a question here that you could actually change an answer there from C to D being the correct answer, and see how it changes your stats. And what's more is it also will change your overall performance of your entire exam. And it's a good way of assessing yourself when you are looking at the goodness of the exam itself. Let me just switch that off again. Sherry, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to cut in there just to give a bit of explanation and context to the group. When you talk about heat mapping the exam, so the exam that Mark was showing up there is a national exam where many universities, students participate, I would say. They take the exam. And the exam is very carefully blueprinted, which means that all the universities look at the balance of not only categories and subjects, but level of difficulty. And so the heat map is meaningful in the context of the exam that was set. And I think that's an important part of looking at, for example, how the computer aids the decision making of the academic in deciding how the exam actually needs to roll out. And it also helps them very carefully next time they want to set up another exam. So the stats can be comparable, and also they can tweak things depending on where the hot and cold spots in the heat map come. So I mean, it's an amazing thing that something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet, when Mark puts his fingers on it, turns into an incredible analytical tool, which helps us in our thinking of what we want for the students to know, and also benchmarking, not only between universities, but between types of courses and between levels of difficulty. So just wanted to expand on that a little bit so that you knew what you were looking at. It wasn't just a bunch of colors. It's a very sophisticated way of making sure that your exit level outcomes are actually being achieved. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. And then Arshad, you were talking about an online system for peer reviewing. Now, unfortunately, I haven't been setting exams for quite a while, so I can tell you about the systems that I know. I'm not necessarily a subject expert in any one of these systems. However, I've been looking into Rogo at the moment, which is the last option in terms of question banking. Rogo is a system that was developed by a British university for internal use at the time, and in reality is mostly developed for the health sciences field. It's been expanded and open sourced at the moment, and is delivered both as a free option and as a service that can be purchased. And from the ground up, they developed it with the way that universities work. So they literally, and I can go back and show you some of the things in Rogo, that it's a university divided into faculties, which is divided into schools, which is subdivided into courses. And there are various roles that are played. And one of the roles is external reviewer, which means that they get a view which is completely separate from the student view, allowing them to add comments to questions, maybe see the statistics, but not actually change them themselves. So that would allow the options which you were actually looking for. And it's the same thing. The peer reviews at the moment, with the impact of COVID, it's all very nice for people to come and review to get them to come and sit down and review your questions. However, if you have reviewers who are more distantly based, something like an online system would be a better way to do things. What Rogo is particularly good at is separating the ability of the reviewers from the ability to actually take or set the exam. So the reviewer might see the exam in a different format, and you could definitely not use those credentials to take the exam later, and you might not even see the marks that are allocated, in an attempt to make it to separate the actual academics from the way in which the question is set. I'm just going to open this back up again if I can. Part of I think I've got another standard which I need to open up here. Not this one, sorry. There was a feature comparison. So it's this ability to add all of this extraneous data to your questions. So the majority of questions that are kept, and especially when we've been looking, and it's not just us, we've been communicating with all of the SADC medical schools at the moment. Questions are typically kept in Microsoft Word format. They typically tend to be a heading with some form of multiple choice question, no real interactivity involved. And purely a correct answer given. The additional data that you have to start thinking about is, for example, how did you do the standard settings on individual questions as well as on the exam itself? Did you do an ANGOF? And I don't know if the word ANGOF rings any bells at the moment, but the idea of a tremendously expensive effort where a number of experts in the field sit around, have a look at an exam, have a look at each individual questions. And in their mind, what they try and do is they try and envisage that they are a student who is just good enough to pass the exam. So they have this concept of a MAC, a minimally acceptable candidate. The idea is you don't really want to know who's doing the best in the class. It's not necessarily going to make them a better health professional. What you're wanting to know most out of your summative exams is, are you passing the people who deserve to pass, who will go out there and not injure people? And are you failing the people who you don't want out there and who don't deserve to pass at that particular time? So the MAC, the minimally acceptable candidate, is someone who just makes that cutoff. So in an ANGOF process, what people do is they look at each individual question and they say, if I am this person, or if I had a group of 10 of these people, 7 of them would possibly pass this question. So we'll give it a 70% pass rate, etc. And they look at the entire exam. They then compile all of those questions together, and you get a pass mark for that particular exam. It is theoretically, depending on your experts, and especially if you pick your experts properly, which generally is people with lots and lots of experience, which means people like heads of unit, heads of department, which means their time is very expensive. You get a very accurate level of assessment. That's a process which you can't do every year. It's just way too expensive. But that kind of detail needs to be attached to individual questions so that you can look back on them in the future and know that that's been a properly assessed question rather than one that you think is acceptable with decent members of members of your community who put the question together. And of course, I don't know, there's been a lot of talk about the Cohen methodology, which is a simpler and less manpower intensive method of determining a pass mark. The idea being, of course, that no exam is similar to another exam. It can be relatively similar. And the idea of deciding a pass mark before you do the exam is actually unfair on the students itself. So, you know, all exams will either be easier or more difficult than other exams. Where this process has been done, especially the ANGOF processes that I have seen, there's never been a major shift of exams. Normally, the people who are setting exams have a long history and a lot of experience. And the biggest shift that I've ever seen in an exam has been 2%, a change in a pass mark. Nonetheless, if you happen to be hit by a moving pass mark, as we've seen in the past, that makes students extremely upset because they don't quite understand the process. And it's meant to be a fair process, and it's meant to be, especially in the health field, a process which is protecting patients rather than protecting students. Any other questions? So it's the question again. Sorry, Richard, if you chat, then I'll answer the next question.
Sorry, thank you, and forgive the background noise. I'm just driving in the car. I need to. I've been reflecting on the fact that assessments need to be, both training and assessments need to be authentic. We need to immerse students in the real world environment, train them there, and assess them there. And that in many ways provides both certainly a validity about their competence in some ways, and is an equitable way of doing so, in the sense that often it's the student is most comfortable in that context. But those reasons aside, for wanting to be doing authentic training and assessment, how can how does that marry with the electronic? How can electronic assessments assist us and in that field or in that world more so than is happening at the moment? And are there any examples internationally that you're aware of where quite simply they're getting it right, Mark?
Well, they are doing similar things in Maastricht, but you know, in reality, the one which should be trumpeted is Doctor, which is doing exactly that, is that you don't have to deliver the assessment electronically. What really aids you is the ability to collect those marks electronically. And what would be nice is, for example, if you're going to get a third party to assess things, is maybe the ability to add additional diagnostic data to what you're gathering on the Doctor platform. So if it's, for example, interpretation of an ECG, you could add a snap of an ECG so it could be looked at later. But the huge advantage of Doctor, firstly, is this ability to take out the fact of one of your teachers disliking you, because it's multiple events, multiple people, multiple scenarios. You can't, I mean, there are people who don't deal well with formal exams. If you consistently don't do well under any stressful condition in the hospital, then maybe that working there is not the right place for you. But what Doctor, of course, as you know, does is it gives you this ability to consolidate that data over time. And not only that, but ideally give you a trend to show you that there is improvement over time. You can also analyze the group as such. So to see, for example, that the majority of students, their trends improve when they've been exposed to Dr. X at institution Y. And then you can go back and have a look at that person and say, why is he such an effective teacher? Why does he create that change in learning amongst the students? So it doesn't have to be electronically delivered. The majority of these multiple choice questions purely are a security blanket, that it's a single system. Everybody's assessed on exactly the same thing at the same time. It's really easy to defend. It doesn't mean that it's in any way the best way of assessing students. It's possibly the easiest way to defend if someone sues you, but doesn't lead to better outcomes. It purely says that you're good at multiple choice questions. It doesn't look at any method of saying that your skills are better. And that's why I say that the Doctor, and as long as you can ally these various marks together and look at trends of how students are doing, because in reality, when you're looking at a couple of different things when you're looking at systems. So to start with, you're looking at a trend of an individual student. Are they improving? Have they figured out how to work properly? Are they able to reason clinically? And over time, is their skill and their knowledge improving over time? You can also look at the actual course itself and say, as a cohort, how does this compare to other cohorts? In a facility, how do the results compare? And then you look at individual questions to say, are we asking the right things of these students? And then to bring it back to the objectives. And I don't know whether this group has had a talk about loop at the moment with objective settings, but it's this idea that you set your objectives well enough and you always loop back to them to say, are we doing what we think that we're doing? We've got these nice overall objectives. Most courses have this objectives which says social accountability. How do we test that? Is there any way in which we can prove that we are actually engendering social accountability within our course? There's no real way in which to do that for multiple choice questions. The ideal way would be to open up something like Doctor to the families of patients and to people allied to students in the clinical settings, and allow that to be a record of whether they are socially conscious or not. In terms of the question that Stalin answered, yes, you can limit access time to questions. It's not really a fair thing to do to students. It's sometimes used in exams in the option in order to stop cheating in exams. However, what would be great is for the students to be able to rush through questions that they can answer easily and then spend proper time thinking on the more difficult questions. What is nice is possibly the ability to see how long students think about questions. And a fine example of this is the SACS exams, which are used for, especially in surgery, for clinical exams. The SACS exams are a case scenario, which is an online scenario where a case progresses and patients do worse. The worst parts of life happen to them. And what happens is students have relatively unlimited time to complete these, but can't go back and modify previous questions. And the class generally divides itself into those who finish the course pretty quickly and do reasonably well. And then at the other side is the people who take the most length of time are either students who are going to fail in the long term or students who are going to get the firsts in the long term and are trying to squeeze the last half a mark out of the exam. But otherwise, Richard, is your hand still up? Okay, that's down. Also, for all of these systems at the moment, in terms of importing, exporting, trialing new systems, etc., Stalin Sass is on the course as well. He's the person with the greatest knowledge of what you can do with question mark. I'm getting to know a little bit about Rogo, and there are subject fields, subject experts, especially in Moodle and in Ulwazi, all of which I think any questions I'd be happy to answer or redirect if you send to me, or to do any trials of questioning. I'm especially interested in doing things like including virtual microscopes, virtual slides, x-rays, movable things like CAT scans and sonars in ongoing exams. Richard again.
Sorry, I just thought I'd perhaps Anastasia, Dr. Ogwanye, or even one of the clinical associate team could reflect on their use of question mark for us, Mark.
Yes.
I mean, I think we're
Absolutely.
all coming at it, myself in particular, from a novice perspective, I must say. But for having just started it, what's our sense of it, Dr. Ogwanye, if you're still on the call?
Good afternoon, Prof. Yes, I'm on the call. Hi, Mark, and
Hi.
hello, everyone. It was interesting to see you almost open our marks. I was literally shaking in my boots, like, are you going to open our analytics? So we've now been on question mark on demand fully from phase 2 end of last year, where we trialed with Stalin's support groups of 150 and 151 doing tests. So prior, we will do the paper-based tests, and it was always a mission to ensure that the papers won all the handlers that will have to come in contact with the whole process of the assessments, that they are foolproof, and that there isn't any room for error in terms of papers leaking and all that. And then it was then the environmental sustainability around printing 150 papers times 10 pages or 15 pages when you have 100 questions on them. And then what happens at the end when you're done with that. And so when we were introduced to question mark on demand early on last year, we went through a process of training. Currently, Shayla is the one who is our main administrator with Stalin's support. So what happens now is that literally the students are scheduled for the different exams. Like when you shared your screen, we literally would have at a point 7 different exams happening at the same time, based on the scheduling for the different students. And the beauty, or one of the things we've enjoyed with this, is that Stalin or Shayla can, from a remote point, have a look at what's happening with a student X or a student Y. If there is a difficulty with technical issues, they can resolve this remotely, as opposed to when we had to run these exams across 5 different geographical zones at the same time. The manpower effort is reduced. The exposure to 21st century assessment techniques is also a huge plus for us. And then the feedback in terms of the analysis once the exams are over is a lot better. and is improving as we experience it, Prof. So we've only just written our second end of block big exams with question mark on demand about 2 weeks ago. And it's been an experience. There is obviously room for improvement and room for development, but we're taking it one step at a time. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. And I think the one thing which you brought up, which is very important, the fear of someone looking at online exams and statistics, and once they're done and going, you write bad exams. What was really nice recently is I went to a conglomerate, a meeting with all of the SADC medical schools, where they had what's called a shredding session, and where everybody sat and pulled apart other people's exams. There's no way that anybody's going to get a perfect exam. The other way it works around is that when you get a question in your exam which has the perfect statistics, then you've got to celebrate and show off to other people. The average exam won't work that way. And Maastricht themselves, the representative there, says they are very, very impressed. They've been doing this for 15 years now, and they finally, across the entire medical school, have a selection of 6,000 questions which they think perform well. It's taken them, as I say, a decade and a half to get those together. The statistics don't reflect the exam. It reflects an opportunity to improve the exams, but nobody's going to write a perfect exam, and mistakes are made on the day. And the reason for their analytics is to adjust for human mistakes and give students the best reflection of their attempts. And that's why I was going to go very quickly through the analytics, purely to show that there's ups, there's downs. It allows you to assess the exam. You have to very carefully remove this from the examiners themselves. No question is going to be perfect unless it's been run through the loop a couple of times. Then back to Richard.
Sorry, no, I should have taken my hand down, but thank you, Mark. Yeah, I think the entire debate around the electronic, well, the use of these tools, as it were, is one can look at it through so many different lenses, and the feasibility that is possible on an extended academic platform for students being in remote settings and not having to come central for use of this particular tool is well, question mark is a real plus. And the other area, of course, that is in the clinical viva context, and that we've been debating as a different modality, whether the students can again stay in their remote settings across 5 different districts, 5 different academic health complexes at all sorts of different places, and log on and be then assessed for their clinical reasoning in a viva, on a Zoom call, or on a and that's of course very different, but it just speaks to the feasibility aspect as well, or again, for a completely different modality. And there's so many reasons for us wanting to move on to the extended academic platform and provide more access, as it were, to medical training from that perspective. We have to be thinking along these lines around authenticity, around feasibility, around to what degree reports can then track the various statistics as well over multiple different sites, for having so many different potential trainers and assessors. And I think the latter is possibly the biggest area of growth for us, or potential growth for us, Mark.
Yes. And that's exactly why I think you have to look at, everybody has been looking at assessment and purely at delivering the exam at the moment. So you're using electronics, it's delivering the exam, it's finished. Whereas the afters, the banking those questions for reuse, deciding whether the reuse has been exposed, using them for the heretical task of assessing the assessors, is going to cause a huge furore. But those are the things where the real strengths are, to say, not so much assessing the students, but assessing ourselves. Are we teaching correctly? Are we assessing what we think we're assessing? Are we assessing correctly? And are we making the right decisions when it comes to pass fail? And I think that's a great time to stop. So thanks all. And as I was saying, I'm always available. The easiest method of finding me is on Teams generally, because I've generally got some method of picking up a Teams call, no matter where I am. And as I say, I'd love to see an expansion of all of the sides of using IT in assessment. And I think I'll move across to Giannis for the close down.
Thank you, Mark. So for next week, we will be continuing with MCQ assessment, and the idea with next week's learning workshop would be to create authentic MCQs for assessment. And then, yeah, thank you so much for everyone for joining. And yet again, Mark, thanks so much for an interesting presentation.